More moves are coming for the Toronto Raptors, and now we officially know one thing for sure. This front office is not done. The Raptors just made their first real move of trade season, and according to multiple reports, this is only the beginning. What looked like a small, quiet adjustment is actually opening the door for several different paths, some minor, some much bigger than people realize. So in this video, we're going to break down what this first move actually means, why it happened now, what it signals about the Raptors' direction, and what the next one or two moves could realistically look like. Because while this trade might not feel like a blockbuster on the surface, it changes the math, it changes the flexibility, and it changes how aggressive Toronto can be over the next few days. Let's start with the move itself. According to reports from Shams Charania, the Toronto Raptors were involved in a three-team trade that brought Chris Paul into the picture while sending out young salary and future assets. On paper, it looks strange. Chris Paul is near the end of his career. He's barely played this season, and he's not someone you'd expect a team like Toronto to build around. But that's not the point of this move. This trade was never about Chris Paul the player. It was about Chris Paul the contract. Toronto's priority heading into this deadline was very clear. Get under the luxury tax, reset flexibility, and avoid future repeater penalty. And this move does exactly that. By completing this deal, the Raptors now slide under the tax line, creating breathing room not just for this season, but for the next few years. That matters more than most fans want to admit. And almost immediately after the trade went down, the reaction started. Some people assumed this meant another guard was on the way out. Others thought it was the beginning of a teardown. And some even believed Chris Paul might actually suit up and play meaningful minutes for this team. But here's the reality. Chris Paul is very unlikely to ever play a game as a Toronto Raptor. League sources have already made it clear that Toronto does not require him to report, and the expectation around the league is that he will either be flipped again in a follow-up move or waived outright. Which brings us to the most important part of this deal. By getting under the tax, Toronto now has roughly $3 million in flexibility to work with after the deadline. That number might not sound like much, but it opens options that simply didn't exist before. It allows them to fill out the roster without being forced into a bad trade. It allows them to wait instead of rushing. And most importantly, it prevents them from locking themselves into repeater tax territory at a time when their payroll is only going to increase. Because look at the contracts on this team. Jakob Poeltl is locked in long-term. Emmanuel Quickley is on a massive deal. Scotty Barnes is already a max-level cornerstone. Brandon Ingram is making serious money. And RJ Barrett's future is still unresolved. If Toronto stayed in the tax this year, the penalties down the line would become brutal. This move resets the clock. So what happens next? There are really two paths forward. The first is relatively simple. Toronto waives Chris Paul, keeps that cap flexibility, and waits until after the deadline to address their biggest roster hole, backup center, through the buyout market. That would be the conservative approach. Low risk, no major assets move. Just filling out the roster with a serviceable big to survive the rest of the season. The second path is more aggressive. Toronto could use Chris Paul's expiring salary as part of a small follow-up trade. Package it with another minimum contract, target a low-cost center making under $5 million per year, and solve the problem without waiting on the buyout market. Both options are very much on the table. What's important is that Toronto no longer has to do anything, and that leverage matters. Now let's talk about Jakob Poeltl because he's still the elephant in the room. The Raptors do not want to move him at his lowest value. He had a career year last season, and right now his back issues have scared off potential buyers. That doesn't mean he won't be traded, but it does mean Toronto would prefer to wait. They already spent significant draft capital to acquire him. Dumping him now would be a mistake unless it directly unlocks something bigger. Which brings us to the name that keeps hovering over all of this, Domantas Sabonis. Right now, the talks around Sabonis have cooled, not because Toronto lost interest, but because the market hasn't lined up yet. Sacramento wants value. Toronto needs flexibility. And until recently, there simply wasn't a clean way to move Poeltl and complete a multi-team framework. That's what makes this first trade important. It doesn't guarantee anything. It doesn't mean a blockbuster is imminent, but it keeps Toronto alive in conversations that would otherwise be dead. And in trade season, staying alive is everything. Over the next few days, things can change very quickly. A team gets desperate, a market dries up, an injury shifts priorities, and suddenly, a deal that made no sense yesterday becomes possible overnight. For now, the Raptors have done what they needed to do. They created flexibility, avoided long-term damage, and gave themselves options. Whether they use those options for a small tweak or something much bigger remains to be seen. But one thing is clear. This wasn't the final move. It was the setup. And now, everything is in play.